Hey there, beautiful souls. Before we dive into today's incredible story, make sure to drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Sometimes the most powerful moments in life happen when we least expect them, and this story proves that even the smallest encounters can change everything. On a chilly autumn morning in Chicago, Robert Martinez stood at his usual corner outside the United Center, carefully arranging vintage basketball jerseys on his small folding table. His weathered hands, once known for their perfect jump shot form, now trembled slightly as he smoothed out the wrinkles in a red number 23 Bulls jersey. At 68 years old, Robert had been selling these jerseys for the past 5 years, but his connection to basketball ran much deeper than most of his customers could ever guess. The morning crowd was thin, just a few early birds heading to work, their collars turned up against the wind that whipped between the tall buildings. Robert pulled his worn leather jacket tighter around his shoulders, the same jacket he'd worn on countless bus rides to high school games back in the 1970s. His eyes, still sharp despite the years, scanned the street as he remembered those glory days. Robert had once been known as Lightning Martinez, the star point guard for his high school team. Back then, everyone said he was headed for the pros. The scouts came to watch him play, and the local papers ran stories about the kid from the South Side who could outshoot anyone in the state. But life has a way of changing our carefully laid plans, and Robert's dreams of NBA stardom had been derailed by a single moment, a car accident that left him with a permanently damaged knee just months before college recruitment began. Now, decades later, he made his living selling memories to others. Each jersey on his table told a story, not just of the players who wore them, but of the dreams they represented. He knew every detail, every championship, every legendary moment associated with each number. His customers often stayed to chat, drawn in by his encyclopedic knowledge of the game and his gentle, storyteller's way of sharing it. That morning had started like any other. Robert had arrived before sunrise, setting up his modest display with the care of a museum curator. His granddaughter Angela had helped him organize his inventory the night before, labeling each jersey with its year and significance. She worried about him standing out in the cold all day, but Robert insisted. This wasn't just about making money, it was about staying connected to the game he loved. The first few hours passed slowly. He sold a couple of jerseys to early morning customers, sharing stories about the players as he carefully wrapped each purchase. A young boy had stopped by with his father, eyes wide as Robert described the magic of watching the Bulls' championship runs in person. The father had bought a jersey, but more importantly, they had stayed to listen to Robert's stories, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Around mid-morning, Robert noticed a sleek black SUV slow down near his corner. This wasn't unusual, expensive cars often passed through this part of town, especially on game days. But something about this one made him pause. The vehicle came to a stop, and the back window rolled down slowly. Robert's heart skipped a beat as a familiar face peered out, one he hadn't seen in person for over 40 years, though he'd watched it countless times on television. The face belonged to Michael Jordan himself, and there was a flash of recognition in his eyes as he studied Robert's features. Time seemed to stand still as their eyes met. Robert felt himself transported back to a high school gymnasium in 1973, where two young players had faced off in a legendary state championship game. Before the accident, before the diverging paths of their lives, before one became a global icon and the other a street vendor, they had been equals on the court, if only for one night. The SUV's door opened, and Michael stepped out, his presence immediately drawing attention from passers-by. But his focus remained on Robert, studying him with an intensity that hadn't changed since their playing days. "Martinez?" he asked, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and something deeper, recognition of a shared past that felt both distant and immediate. Robert nodded, straightening up despite the protest from his bad knee. "Been a long time, Michael," he said softly, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. They stood there for a moment, two men connected by a thread of history that most people walking by could never understand. Michael moved closer to the table, his eyes scanning the carefully arranged jerseys before returning to Robert's face. "Lightning Martinez," he said, shaking his head slightly. "I never forgot that game. You scored 38 points against us. Nobody else ever came close to that in high school. Robert managed a small smile, memories flooding back. 39, he corrected gently. But your team still won by 2. The old competitive spark flickered between them, a reminder of who they had been, 2 young men with dreams as big as the sky, before life had taken them in such different directions. Michael picked up one of the jerseys from the table, running his fingers over the familiar number 23. I heard about the accident, he said quietly. Everyone thought you were headed to the top. I used to wonder what happened to you. Robert's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his jacket. Life happens, he replied, his voice carrying no bitterness, just the wisdom of years. We don't always get to choose our path, but we make the best of the one we're given. The morning crowd had begun to gather, people recognizing Michael and pulling out their phones to capture the moment. But Michael seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on the man before him and the memory of a game played long ago. Tell me something, Martinez, Michael said, leaning against the table. Do you ever think about that last shot? The one that rimmed out at the buzzer? Robert's laugh was soft but genuine. Only every day for the past 40 years, he admitted. I can still see it in my sleep, the perfect release, the ball spinning through the air, and then... He shrugged, leaving the rest unsaid. Michael nodded, understanding written across his features. In that moment, they weren't a global sports icon and a street vendor. They were just 2 old basketball players sharing memories of a game that had meant everything to them both. I've got something to show you, Michael said suddenly, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out his phone and brought up a grainy footage from that championship game, preserved despite the decades. My foundation's been collecting old game films, preserving them for history. Found this last month. Robert's breath caught as he watched his younger self move across the small screen, his jersey number 11 a blur as he drove to the basket. His form was perfect, his speed legendary, everything that had earned him the nickname Lightning. Look at that crossover, Michael commented, genuine admiration in his voice. You know, I stole that move from you. Used it in my rookie year. Nobody ever knew where it came from. The admission hung in the air between them, a bridge across the years of silence. Robert felt his eyes growing moist, not from sadness but from the recognition of what might have been, and the acknowledgement of what was. Michael turned to his driver, who had been standing quietly nearby, and spoke in low tones. The driver nodded and returned to the SUV, retrieving a small package. Michael took it and turned back to Robert, his expression serious. I've got a proposition for you, Lightning, he said, using the old nickname with respect. The Bulls are hosting a Legends game next month. Special exhibition, bringing back players from different eras. I want you there, not watching from the stands, but on the bench with us. As an honorary coach. Robert's hands gripped the edge of his table, steadying himself. Michael, I'm not a legend. I never made it. You made it further than you think, Michael replied, opening the package to reveal a custom Bulls jacket with Coach Martinez embroidered on the chest. That night in '73, you taught me something about what it means to be a true player. Not just the skills, but the heart, the passion. I carried that lesson through my whole career. The crowd around them had grown larger, but the world had narrowed to just this moment, just these 2 men and a shared history that had shaped them both in different ways. Robert reached out slowly, touching the jacket with trembling fingers. Your story deserves to be told, Michael continued. Those kids out there wearing my jersey, they need to know about the other heroes of the game. The ones who didn't make the headlines but still gave everything they had. Robert looked at the jacket, then at his table of jerseys, then back at Michael. In his mind, he saw himself at 17, flying down the court, the ball an extension of his will, the future bright and unlimited. He saw the accident, the years of rehabilitation, the slow acceptance of a different path. And now, standing here, he saw something else, a recognition that sometimes life's greatest moments come not from achieving our dreams, but from how we handle their loss. There's one condition, Michael added, a familiar competitive glint in his eye. You have to show these young coaches that crossover of yours. The real one, not the watered-down version I used. Robert laughed then, a full, rich sound that carried across the morning air. Only if you admit in front of everyone that you stole it from me. Deal, Michael said, extending his hand. As they shook, it wasn't just a handshake between old rivals or a basketball legend and a street vendor. It was a recognition of the threads that connect all our stories, the moments that define us, and the unexpected ways life brings us full circle. Have you ever experienced a moment of recognition that changed everything? A chance encounter that brought healing to an old wound? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful acts of kindness come from simply being seen, truly seen, for who we are and who we might have been. Remember to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us that every life has value, every dream leaves its mark, and it's never too late for a moment of grace to change everything. Until next time, beautiful souls, keep believing in the power of unexpected connections and the healing that comes from being remembered. Word of what happened that morning spread quickly through Chicago's basketball community. By afternoon, Robert Martinez's usual quiet corner had become a pilgrimage site for local sports fans, though the man himself was no longer there. Instead, he was sitting in Michael Jordan's private office at the United Center, surrounded by gleaming trophies and memories of a game that had shaped both their lives in profoundly different ways. "You kept up with basketball all these years?" Michael asked, leaning back in his chair as Robert's eyes wandered over the photographs that lined the walls. Each image told a story of triumph, of moments that had become legend in the sport they both loved. Robert nodded, his weathered hands clasped in his lap. "Never could stay away," he admitted. "Even after the accident, I was in the gym as much as I could be. Coached youth leagues when my knee could handle standing that long. Taught my kids the game. These past few years, selling those jerseys, it was my way of staying connected." Michael's expression softened as he studied the man before him. Robert Martinez wasn't just another face from the past. He represented something deeper, a reminder of how thin the line could be between greatness and obscurity, between dreams realized and dreams deferred. "Tell me about life after that night," Michael said quietly. "After the championship game. I always wondered." Robert's eyes focused on a distant point, remembering. "It was tough," he began. "That summer, everything seemed possible. Had scholarship offers from 3 D1 schools. Was practicing twice a day, getting ready. Then one rainy night, one patch of black ice." He shook his head. "Doctor said I'd be lucky to walk without a limp, let alone play again." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Michael reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Lightning Strikes, Martinez leads Southside to state finals." Below it was a photo of a young Robert, suspended in midair, the ball floating toward the basket with perfect form. "Found this while we were researching for the Legends game," Michael explained. The stats from that season, they were incredible. 32 points per game average. 8 assists. Shot nearly 60% from the field. In today's game, with modern training and medical care. Robert held up a hand, stopping him. "We can't live in what-ifs," he said gently. "I made peace with that a long time ago. Had to, for my own sanity." Michael nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Tell me about what came after. What did you do?" "Got married right out of high school to my sweetheart, Patricia," Robert smiled at the memory. "She was the one who got me through the darkest days after the accident. Went to community college, studied business. Opened a sporting goods store on the South Side. Raised 3 kids, all of them basketball players. Not stars, but they loved the game like I did." He paused, his voice growing softer. "Lost Patricia to cancer 5 years ago. That's when I started with the jerseys. Needed something to get me out of the house, keep me connected to people. Every jersey has a story, you know? Not just about the player who wore it, but about the dreams it represents." Michael stood and walked to a display case, opening it carefully. He pulled out a basketball, its leather cracked and worn with age. "This is from that championship game," he said, turning it in his hands. "My first real taste of what it meant to face someone who could push me to be better. Someone who made me question if I was good enough." Robert's eyes widened slightly. "You kept that?" "Some games stay with you," Michael replied, tossing the ball gently to Robert. who caught it instinctively. Some opponents teach you things about yourself that you carry forever. Robert's fingers traced the old leather, muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice taking over. His hands might have aged, but they remembered the feel of the ball, the perfect grip for his legendary crossover. "Show me," Michael said suddenly. "Show me that move one more time. Not at full speed, just the footwork." Robert hesitated, then slowly stood. His knee protested, but some things were worth a little pain. He dribbled the ball once, twice, his body falling into a rhythm that had once been as natural as breathing. The move was smooth, even at half speed, a subtle shift of weight, a change of direction that had fooled countless defenders. "There it is," Michael grinned. "That's the original. You know, I spent weeks trying to figure out how you did it. The timing, the head fake, it was all perfect. And now you're going to admit that to everyone at the Legends game?" Robert asked, a glimmer of his old competitive spirit showing through. "A deal's a deal," Michael laughed. "But first, we need to get you ready. The game's in 3 weeks, and there's a lot to do." He pressed a button on his desk phone, and his assistant entered with a large garment bag. "Your new wardrobe," Michael explained. "Can't have a Bulls coach looking anything less than professional." Robert watched as the assistant unzipped the bag, revealing several custom-tailored suits in addition to the coaching jacket he'd been given earlier. Each piece was exactly his size, each detail carefully considered. "Michael, I can't accept," he began, but Michael cut him off. "You're not accepting charity," he said firmly. "You're accepting a job. The Legends game is just the beginning. We need people like you in our youth development program. People who understand that basketball isn't just about talent, it's about heart, about overcoming adversity, about finding your way even when the path you planned gets blocked." Robert sank back into his chair, overwhelmed. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why now, after all these years?" Michael was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because some debts need to be paid," he said finally. "That night in '73, you showed me what greatness looked like. Not just in how you played, but in how you carried yourself after that last shot missed. You walked off that court with your head high, thanked my team for the game, and meant it. That taught me something about character that no coach ever could." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "And now, looking at what you've done with your life, how you've kept the love of the game alive, how you've passed it on to others, that's another kind of greatness. One that deserves to be recognized." The afternoon light slanted through the office windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, they could hear the sounds of a basketball practice, the squeak of shoes on hardwood, the rhythmic bounce of balls, the sharp whistle of coaches. It was the soundtrack of their shared passion, a melody that had underscored both their lives in different ways. 3 weeks, Robert said thoughtfully. "Think you can handle having me around that long? Think you can handle telling your story to a new generation?" Michael countered. "Because that's what this is really about. Every kid who's faced setbacks, every player who's had to find a different path, they need to hear about Lightning Martinez." Robert looked down at the basketball still in his hands, then at the newspaper clipping on the desk. His younger self stared back at him, frozen in that moment of perfect possibility. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of what might have been. Instead, he felt the promise of what could still be. "On one condition," he said, meeting Michael's gaze. "Those kids in the youth program, they need to learn the real crossover. Not your version." Michael's laughter filled the office. "Deal," he said, extending his hand once again. "But you have to promise to tell them the whole story. Not just about the moves you taught me, but about how you kept the game alive in your heart all these years. That's the lesson they really need to hear." As they shook hands, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, the feeling of being back in the game, back where he belonged. Not as a player, not as a vendor, but as someone with wisdom to share, stories to tell, and lessons to teach. Beautiful souls, sometimes life's greatest comeback stories aren't about returning to who we were, but about discovering who we can still become. Has someone from your past ever reappeared at just the right moment to help you write a new chapter? Share your stories in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us that it's never too late for recognition, never too late for healing, and never too late to find a new way to live out our dreams. Until next time, keep believing in the power of second chances and the beauty of unexpected reunions. The 3 weeks leading up to the Legends game transformed Robert Martinez's life in ways he never could have imagined. Each morning, he arrived at the United Center not as a vendor, but as a respected member of the Bulls coaching staff, his new suits and team jacket a visible symbol of the change in his circumstances. His first day of official practice brought an unexpected wave of emotion. Walking onto the court where he'd watched countless games from the stands, Robert felt the familiar smell of hardwood and leather wrap around him like an old friend. The squeak of basketball shoes against the polished floor echoed in his memory, overlaying present and past in a symphony of remembered dreams. Michael had arranged for a special introduction session, gathering the coaching staff and visiting Legends for what would become an unforgettable morning. As Robert stood before them, Michael shared the story of their 1973 championship game, pulling up the restored footage on the giant screens above the court. "Watch this," Michael said to the assembled group, pointing to the young Robert's fluid movements. "That crossover you've all seen me do? The one that became part of my signature style? I learned it right here from Lightning Martinez." The gathered legends leaned forward, studying the grainy footage with professional interest. Among them were some of the greatest names in basketball history, players whose jerseys Robert had sold on his corner for years. Now they watched, murmuring appreciatively as the young Robert executed his perfect crossover again and again. "Nobody could stop that move," Michael continued, genuine admiration in his voice. "I spent years trying to replicate it perfectly. Never quite got there." He turned to Robert with a grin. "Which is why I brought the master himself to teach it to our next generation." Robert stepped forward, his bad knee stiff but his spirit soaring. "The secret," he began, his voice carrying the weight of years of understanding, "isn't in the hands or even the feet. It's in the eyes. You have to make your opponent believe in a future that isn't going to happen." For the next hour, Robert broke down the mechanics of his legendary move, demonstrating the subtle weight shifts and misdirections that made it so effective. His audience was rapt, Hall of Famers taking notes like rookies at their first practice. When he finally showed the complete sequence at half speed, the gym erupted in appreciative applause. But it wasn't just about basketball. During breaks, Robert shared stories of his life after the accident, of finding new ways to stay connected to the game he loved. He spoke about running his sporting goods store, about coaching youth leagues, about teaching his children fundamentals. His words carried a deeper message about resilience, about finding purpose in unexpected places. Word spread quickly through Chicago's basketball community. Local media picked up the story, the forgotten legend who had taught Michael Jordan one of his signature moves, now returning to the game in a new role. Robert's children were interviewed, sharing proud memories of their father's unwavering love for basketball despite his physical limitations. His daughter Angela, now a high school basketball coach herself, visited during one of the practice sessions. She stood quietly at the sidelines, tears in her eyes as she watched her father demonstrate techniques to players who had only existed as posters on her childhood bedroom walls. "You know," she said to Michael during a break, "he never missed a single one of my games. No matter how much his knee was hurting, he was there. And he never, not once, let us see any bitterness about what happened to him." Michael nodded, watching as Robert worked with a small group of players. "That's why we need him here," he replied. "Basketball skills can be taught by anyone. But that kind of character? That's rare." The practices weren't always easy. Some days, Robert's knee would swell from the increased activity, forcing him to coach from a chair at the sidelines. But even then, his presence made a difference. Players found themselves drawn to him during breaks, listening to his stories, absorbing lessons that went far beyond basketball. One afternoon, about a week before the Legends game, Robert arrived at the United Center to find his old folding table from the street corner set up in the practice gym. On it, carefully arranged, were all his jerseys, but now each one was autographed by the player who had worn it. A little surprise from the team, Michael explained, watching Robert's face as he ran his fingers over the signatures. But there's one more thing. He handed Robert a frame containing a jersey, number 11, in the colors of his old high school team. Next to it was a Bulls jersey with the same number, Martinez, emblazoned across the back. The high school one is the original, Michael said softly. Took some doing to track it down. The Bulls one, well, that's to remind everyone that some legends don't need to have played in the NBA to deserve recognition. Robert stood silent for a long moment, emotions playing across his face as he studied the jerseys. Finally, he turned to Michael. "You know what this means to me," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "But you don't know what it would have meant to Patricia. She always said I needed to find my way back to basketball somehow." Michael's expression softened. "Tell me about her," he said, pulling up 2 chairs. For the next hour, practice continued around them as Robert shared stories of the woman who had been his strength through the darkest times, who had helped him find purpose when his dreams seemed shattered. She was the one who suggested the sporting goods store, Robert remembered, smiling. Said if I couldn't play the game, I could help others play it. When we opened, she insisted on putting up that photo from the championship game right behind the counter. Said it would inspire kids to dream big. "Sounds like she was quite a woman," Michael observed. "The best," Robert agreed. "After she passed, I couldn't bear to be in the store anymore. Too many memories. That's when I started with the jerseys. Needed to be outside, talking to people about basketball, keeping the stories alive." "And now?" Michael asked. Robert looked around the gym, watching the players practice, feeling the familiar energy of the game he had never stopped loving. "Now I think I'm exactly where I need to be. Where she would have wanted me to be." The days leading up to the Legends game took on a dreamlike quality. Robert found himself featured in pre-game promotions, his story capturing the imagination of basketball fans across the country. Letters began arriving at the United Center, from former players he had coached in youth leagues, from customers who had bought jerseys and stayed to hear his stories, from people who had faced their own setbacks and found inspiration in his journey. Michael arranged for Robert's entire family to attend the Legends game, his children, grandchildren, even his old high school teammates. They would all be there to witness not just a celebration of basketball history, but the recognition of a man who had found a different kind of greatness in how he handled life's unexpected turns. The night before the game, Robert returned to his corner outside the United Center one last time. The streetlights cast long shadows as he stood there, remembering all the mornings he had set up his table, all the stories he had shared, all the dreams he had kept alive through the simple act of selling jerseys and sharing his love for the game. A young boy walked past with his father, stopping to stare at the empty corner. "Dad," Robert heard him say, "this is where that man used to sell jerseys. The one who taught Michael Jordan that move." Robert smiled in the darkness, realizing that his story had already taken on a life of its own. He reached down and touched his knee, the knee that had ended one dream but, somehow, had led him to another. Tomorrow would bring its own kind of glory, different from what he had imagined as a young player, but no less meaningful. Beautiful souls, sometimes life's greatest victories don't come in the form we expected. They come in moments of recognition, in chances to share our stories, in opportunities to turn our setbacks into stepping stones for others. Have you ever had a moment when what seemed like an ending turned out to be a new beginning? Share your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us that our worth isn't measured by the dreams we achieve, but by how we handle the dreams that change. Until next time, remember that every life has a story worth telling, and it's never too late for that story to take an unexpected turn towards something beautiful. The morning of the Legends game dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect Chicago day that seemed designed for making memories. Inside the United Center, Robert Martinez stood in the coach's locker room, carefully adjusting his new Bulls jacket in the mirror. The embroidered "Coach Martinez" caught the light, and for a moment he saw his younger self reflected in the glass. The boy who had once dreamed of wearing a different kind of uniform in this very building. His family had gathered in the arena early, for generations of Martinez basketball lovers filling a special section near the bench. His children, grandchildren, and even his 2-month-old great-grandson were all wearing custom jerseys with his number 11. In the stands, he could see faces from every chapter of his life, former customers from his sporting goods store, players he had coached in youth leagues, even some of his old high school teammates. Michael Jordan found him there, still studying his reflection. Having second thoughts, "Lightning?" he asked, using the old nickname with a smile. Robert shook his head, turning to face his former rival and newfound friend. "Just remembering something Patricia used to say. She told me that sometimes God closes one door so you can find the one you were really meant to walk through. Took me 40 years to find that door." "Well," Michael replied, "let's make sure everyone knows exactly which door they're walking through today." He handed Robert a small remote control. "Push that button when they call your name during introductions. Trust me." The pre-game atmosphere was electric. The United Center was packed, the crowd buzzing with anticipation. Local media had been running stories all week about the lost legend of Chicago basketball, and the audience was eager to witness this unexpected reunion of old rivals. The introductions began with the legendary players, each name drawing roars from the crowd. Then the announcer's voice boomed through the arena. And now, making his return to basketball after 40 years, the man they called Lightning, the original master of the crossover, Coach Robert Martinez. Robert pressed the button, and suddenly the giant screens above the court came to life. The grainy footage from 1973 began to play, but it was different now, professionally restored, enhanced, set to music. The young Robert Martinez danced across the screen, his movements fluid and graceful, his legendary crossover leaving defenders stumbling in his wake. But then the video changed, showing new footage, Robert at his sporting goods store, teaching young players the fundamentals. Robert on his corner outside the United Center, sharing stories with customers. Robert in recent practices, demonstrating his techniques to NBA legends. The final image froze on a split screen. Young Robert in mid-crossover next to Michael Jordan performing the same move years later in a Bulls uniform. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation. Robert felt his eyes growing moist as he looked up at the screens, at the story of his life told through the lens of the game he had never stopped loving. His granddaughter Angela, now standing beside him as his assistant coach, squeezed his hand. The Legends game itself was everything basketball was meant to be, a celebration of the sport, a showcase of talent, a reminder of why the game had captured their hearts in the first place. Robert coached with passion, his tactical knowledge and understanding of the game earning respect from players who had won multiple championships. During a timeout in the second quarter, Michael called everyone to the bench. "Show them," he said to Robert. "Show them the real move one last time." Robert hesitated, glancing at his knee, but the moment felt right. With the whole arena watching, he took the ball and demonstrated his crossover one more time. Though slower than in his youth, the essence of the move was still there, the perfect timing, the subtle misdirection, the pure poetry of motion that had once made him a legend. The crowd went wild. NBA stars gathered around, asking questions, studying his footwork. For a few precious minutes, Robert Martinez was once again exactly what he had always been, a master of the game, sharing his gift with a new generation. As the game wound down, Michael took the microphone at center court. 40 years ago, he began, I played against one of the greatest talents I've ever seen. Life took him down a different path, but he never lost his love for the game. He found ways to keep that love alive, to pass it on to others. Today, we're not just honoring a forgotten legend, we're celebrating everyone who's ever had to find a new way to live out their dreams. He turned to Robert. The Bulls organization has one more surprise for you, Lightning. That corner outside? It's officially yours now. We're setting up a permanent kiosk there, Lightning's legacy. Your jerseys, your stories, your history of the game. But more than that, it's going to be a foundation, helping kids who've faced setbacks stay connected to basketball. And you're going to run it. Robert stood speechless as Michael handed him a set of keys and an official letter of appointment. The crowd's applause washed over him like a wave, carrying with it the weight of 40 years, not of what he had lost, but of what he had given to the game in different ways. Later that evening, after the crowds had gone home and the lights had dimmed in the arena, Robert sat alone on the bench, absorbing everything that had happened. He felt a presence beside him and looked up to see Michael taking a seat. You know what I remember most about that championship game? Michael asked quietly. Not the final score, not even that crossover. I remember watching you in the handshake line after you lost. You looked every player in the eye, congratulated them sincerely. Then you walked off the court with your head high, like you knew that wasn't the end of your story. Robert nodded slowly. Because it wasn't the end. Just took me a while to figure that out. Your wife was right, Michael said. About that door God closes. But you know what I think? Sometimes he sends someone to help you find the new one. Maybe that's what this was all about, not just me recognizing you, but helping you see what you've meant to the game all these years. They sat in comfortable silence, two men connected by a moment in time that had shaped both their lives. Through the empty arena, they could almost hear the echoes of that long-ago game, the squeak of sneakers, the bounce of the ball, the roar of the crowd. What are you thinking about? Michael asked finally. Robert smiled, his eyes distant. That last shot, he said. The one that rimmed out. You know, for years I dreamed about that moment, wondered how different my life would have been if it had gone in. But sitting here now, I'm not sure I would change it. No, Robert said firmly. Because that miss taught me something important, that sometimes life's greatest victories don't come from the shots that go in, but from how we handle the ones that don't. The next morning, Robert returned to his corner outside the United Center. But now, instead of a folding table, there was a beautiful kiosk bearing his nickname and number. The walls were lined with photos telling his story, the young star, the dedicated coach, the passionate storyteller who had kept the spirit of the game alive through decades of selling jerseys. As he unlocked the door for the first time, he noticed a small plaque mounted beside it. The inscription read, "Some legends are measured not by the heights they reached, but by the lives they touched along the way. Welcome to Lightning's legacy." A young boy approached with his father, eyes wide as they looked at the photos. "Are you really him?" the boy asked. "The one who taught Michael Jordan the crossover?" Robert smiled, feeling the weight of his new purpose settling comfortably on his shoulders. "I am," he said. "Would you like to hear the story?" Beautiful souls, sometimes the greatest victories in life come disguised as setbacks, and the most meaningful recognition arrives when we've stopped looking for it. Have you ever had a moment when life seemed to come full circle, when what looked like an ending turned out to be a beautiful beginning? Share your stories in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe for more reminders that it's never too late for recognition, never too late for redemption, and never too late to find a new way to live out your dreams. Until next time, keep believing in the power of second chances, in the beauty of unexpected reunions, and in the truth that every life has a story worth telling, especially the ones that don't follow the path we originally planned. And remember, just like Lightning Martinez taught us, sometimes the most important moves in life aren't the ones that take us to the top, but the ones that help us rise again when life has knocked us down.